Okay, next up, we're going to move to our panel, and thank you so much, all of you, for agreeing to come. And we're really excited that the fires allowed you to come to that, how that management's going. Again, really our topic, and we asked each of our folks whether they're working public lands, private lands with landowners, or a mix, to really give us an idea of activities, kind of how they're thinking about forest health, connections to watershed health, and we're really excited to have all of you. And I'm gonna kind of format wise, we're gonna go one by one. I'll give a little brief time for clarifying questions after each panelist, so we make sure everybody knows, understands what they presented, and then we'll have some time for Q&A and discussion. Any questions on where we're going with this? Okay, seeing none, we're going to start. John Gelling, I am really excited you were actually able to be here with us from the Forest Service. We're excited to have you. Let us know. I didn't know if you want to talk, if you want to share any images, you should be able to just share with the buttons at the bottom. But with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, well, thanks for having me. So my name is John Gellings. I am the district ranger here in Bozeman. Cover the Gallatin Range, the Northern Madison Range, and the Bridger Range. Um, yeah, I just so everyone's aware, I started in late April here. I came over from being the district ranger over at Mount St. Helens, and I got my start in the Forest Service as an avalanche forecaster up in Alaska, and I was up there for about 15 years. So yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Great. And John, we're just going to introduce you one by one. So if you wouldn't mind kind of giving us an overview, what you're doing, how you're thinking about forest health, any connections that you kind of see from your perspective with watershed health.
All right, perfect. So from my perspective, there is no difference between forest health and watershed health. They are so integrated, and everything that happens in the forest flows into the watersheds. And then, the watersheds turn into our water supply here in Bozeman. So, with that, current projects that we are working on are the Highlight Cottonwood Fuels Reduction Project. So that one is mid NEPA right now. Basically, what we're trying to do with that is remove some of the fuels out of the watershed to be able to ensure that our water utility would be able to maintain our actual water flows that we rely upon and drink from in the event that a catastrophic wildfire were to come through. So we're talking about, there's a lot of times when people are wondering what's catastrophic wildfire. Basically, when you have a lot of heavy fuels on the ground, which are represented by really big timber and everything being jackstrawed up, the longer that the fire is burning through those fuels in the spot on the ground, the more that the heat will transfer into the soil and basically sterilize everything. And so that becomes a big issue, and you can see it in many, many places across the world, even where when that happens, everything that's holding the soil together breaks down and easily washes away with lots of, there's no real threshold on what it takes to create a flood, but you're seeing it actually right now. If you go to weather.gov, there's several of the areas around us that are in a flash flood watch because of the burning that's happening, and the water that can be hitting that is going to flow right into everything. So yeah, without it, without forest stewardship, there is no watershed stewardship, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. And there were a couple questions that I think you started to get into, but I just wanted to touch on. I know that you're a leader in the Fireshed project, and then talked with the city of Bozeman too. If you could touch on a little more about the work you're doing with that fuels reduction and thinking through protecting Bozeman's water supply, since so much of it's surface water.
Yeah, so the Bozeman Fireshed, number 690 for those who are counting that. It's a high risk fireshed. It was identified several years ago, and my predecessor, Corey Llewellyn, had worked through the BMW, the Bozeman Municipal Watershed fire fuels reduction project. And what the Highlight Cottonwood fuels reduction project is right next to that on the map, kind of a continuation of that within the wild and urban interface that basically continues on from that area. Because again, if you have a fire that comes into one part of the forest, it's likely to get to the other parts too, unless something changes within the weather parameters or, differences between forest stands on the ground. So with that in mind, yeah, it's continuation of it, looking further out from where the BMW project was. And, it's a long-term project to make sure that our watershed remains viable because yeah, without it, there's no drinking water for very long here. And yeah, it becomes pretty problematic if something were to go pretty big. So if a fire does come in, eventually what our vision is that it would, not be on the ground very long, have low severity and less likelihood of having any sedimentation occur, which then has multiple repercussions, not just for our drinking water, but also for the fish, the wildlife that all depend upon that too. So I think that gets to your question, Karen.
Yeah, thank you, John. Um, any clarifying questions before I move to our next panelist? Lily.
Yeah. John, could you speak a little bit to some of the partnerships that have gone into the Bozeman Fireshed work and sort of, I think it's been kind of collaborative um, up to this point, and then also maybe a little bit of the timeline, sort of the arc of that project or that work where we're at now and sort of the steps ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I've been here since late April, so I will not be able to remember all of them because also just getting off of a fire assignment yesterday. Brain's a little foggy from that, but overall, yeah, working with the Gallatin County, working with the city of Bozeman, those are two really big partnerships that we've really um, worked through a lot of that process with because we don't necessarily administer every piece of land that's out there. And then also in conjunction with Friends of Highlight that have been, integral in there. With our current plan on trying to move forward, as everybody here may have heard, or if you haven't seen this, there was a large kind of stop work order on a lot of things within the past several months regarding anything related to Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which one of those components that hits here home is the Bozeman Collaborative Wildfire Risk Reduction Program. And so we had several millions of dollars that we were approved to move forward on continuation of BMW projects. And those were paused, and as of last week, I was still hopeful that we were going to get that yet this fiscal year, but it's looking like everything other than a few projects in the I think it was one is on the Kootenai National Forest, and then one I'm pretty sure was on the Helena Lewis and Clark National Forest. All the other projects like ours were pressed, the pause button was pressed for this fiscal year. And so we're still hopeful that we'll be able to get it next year because we are also nationally changing around how we do budgeting. And so I'm still hopeful that we'll be able to continue moving forward with that, but it's not going to happen until at the earliest October 1st.
Great. Thank you, John. That's really helpful.
Mhm.
I'm going to move on to our next person just so we can hear from everyone. And then I did really want to leave some time for Q&A. I know there's some other people today that have been doing some more local forestry activities that want to chime in afterwards. Next up, we have Ariana Stikos from the NRCS. And Ariana, I have your PowerPoint. You had just a few slides you want to show us. Do you want me to share? Do you want to share what would be easiest for you?
Would you mind sharing it for me, Karen?
You bet.
Thanks.
And then I'll get this going while you introduce yourself, and then we'll head into that.
Perfect. So like Karen said, my name is Ariana Skikos. I work at NRCS in Bozeman here. I am normally, or I grew up in Northern California, and yeah, just dealing with different precipitations that are much different than kind of the Gallatin Valley. So it has been a big learning process, but I've done prescribed burning and been on more research-based in California. So it's a bit of a transition for me in applying some conservation work here in Bozeman.
Great. And can everybody see the screen share okay? Okay, perfect. Great. And Ariana, just let me know. Do you want me to advance slide?
Yes, please.
Okay.
So I've had a few people tell me that like understanding begins with good definitions. And I know John kind of talked on some of these definitions as well. So I apologize if this is kind of going to be redundant, as I assume some of the other speakers as well. Also, if you already know these definitions, I apologize in advance, but just so we're all on the same page, I feel like it's really important. So the wildland-urban interface, or typically referred to as the WUI, is the zone where structures and other human development meet or intermingle with undeveloped wildland or vegetative fuels. These are really high priority areas for NRCS in just protecting people's homes, structures, allowing them to be able to escape or flee a fire if a fire were to happen. A fuel break is kind of a way to do that. So we do those on specific areas within people's properties. NRCS does shaded fuel breaks. What that means is that we don't take the understory all the way down to the bare mineral soil. We have trees that are also shading the canopy. So we allow for trees. Other fuel breaks from other people's definitions is removing any organic matter whatsoever. Ladder fuels, kind of self-explanatory, but just any fuels that can carry from the ground all the way up to the canopy or the tops of the trees. And then soil hydrophobicity, also kind of self-explanatory, soils that repel water and then are considered hydrophobic. Fire intensity, this often gets mixed up with fire or burn severity. So fire intensity is the amount of energy produced by a fire, often described by the flame length or the rate of spread. And then the burn or fire severity is the measure of vegetation burn severity by the degree of scorch on a tree. And the limbs and the amount of vegetation burned and the percentage of vegetation that is dead. You can go ahead and the next slide. Oops, I lost you.
Can you see it, Ariana?
Yes, I can. Sorry about
Okay,
that.
great.
So NRCS works with exclusively private individuals or entities. We find a lot of people that own forest land are private individuals and entities, like throughout the United States. Private entities own 445 million acres of land, of forested land. So I feel like that NRCS can kind of do the biggest impact on those parcels of land, which I included are maps of our current locations where we do forestry work. So we have the Horseshoe Hills, which is kind of that blue polygon there. Our old Joint Chiefs is in that orange hatched polygon, and then the Bridger Bangtails is in that green polygon there. We're mostly emphasizing fuels mitigation, reduction in the amount of fuels because the history of fire exclusion, a lot of these areas are overstocked with timber. And so just the fire risk is higher. And like I said, people moving into the WUI and everything like that. So we're trying to mitigate loss of life, loss of structures, habitat, um, a lot of different things. Also in the Horseshoe Hills, we're trying to reduce juniper encroachment specifically, um, just again because of fire exclusion. And we're also trying to increase the soil holding capacity just because juniper can consume 30 to 35 gallons of water a day. So we're really trying to release some of that soil moisture and allow for some of the grass and forbs to be able to come back that have kind of been pushed out from the juniper. And some of that burn severity, it's just driven by a slew of environmental factors, including topography, slope, aspect, weather, climatic history of a site. So each site that we address is very specific in how we choose a certain practice to apply there. And you can kind of see a picture there, and that's of one of our sites, and that was a field break on the back side of someone's home. And we do a canopy spacing with our field breaks, and that's just dependent on slope. So that again is site specific. I bring up hydrophobicity within the soil just because high severity fires can actually change the soil physical properties, so that when you have that layer of soil hydrophobicity after the waxy vegetation has burned in these high severity soils, all that soil can just run off and erode into the streams and waterways, which obviously we don't want. So we're really trying to also mitigate that, but also keeping in mind as well in draws and kind of steeper areas, definitely anything over 40% grade, we want to keep those roots intact, and we want to keep vegetation there for the same reason. We don't want these huge erosion events to occur. So it's kind of a balancing act of erosion and also fire mitigation that I think we're all pretty aware of. You can go ahead and do the next slide. So this is a image of another site in the Horseshoe Hills, Clarkston area. And so this was a site that we used forest stand improvement on, and all those logs that are down is going to be removed from the site. But this project just kind of put a pause on it because they actually had so much rain and they were tearing up the soil. So that is also something that we try to consider as well, obviously. And this was forest stand improvement. So the forest stand improvement practice with NRCS, you are allowed tighter spacing in between the trees. And this is directed more towards just overall forest health and also secondarily the fire risk reduction. You can go ahead and next slide. That's kind of what I had. I know that there's quite a few speakers, and I think we're probably going to overlap quite a bit. But the biggest thing is that NRCS works with private landowners and private entities. And so if you know anybody that needs anything, come in, put in an application. Our application deadline is October 29th of this year. So yeah, if you have any questions.
Great. Thank you so much. That was really helpful. Any quick clarifying questions before we go to Jay? Okay, I don't see any clarifying questions. And again, we're going to have more time for discussion. And again, we know we overlap, but forestry is run by a bunch of different entities. So we really wanted to feel how this goes together. So thank you. Jay Pape, sounded like you've been having a big week too from the messages. Gallatin County Emergency Services, we're so happy to have you. Again, love to hear from your perspective and more about your activities.
Sure. Well, thank you for having us. And I want to say a special thanks to both John and Ariana for going through the definition, so I don't have to go through all that stuff. And then for John explaining the situation with the Forest Service and the BMW, because that's the Bozeman Municipal Watershed. That's a critical factor for us, as that is our water supply. Um, so with I'm the preparedness and mitigation manager for Gallatin County, and my primary role is administering grant programs to help private landowners reduce fuels on their properties. Very similar programs to what Ariana is doing. And in fact, we work together quite a bit. We have 3 different grants available to homeowners. One is a FEMA grant that is actually still in existence, we're thankful for. That was applied for right after, well, in response to the Bridger Foothills fire of 2020. That grant specifically focuses on reducing fuels in the home ignition zone for people that live in the WUI, the wildland urban interface. So we'll go and assess the ignition potential of that structure based on the vegetation around their homes, and then make recommendations for what they can do to reduce that vegetation and ultimately reducing their risk. Focusing on the home ignition zone, we work in 3 areas, essentially 0 to 5 feet from the home, 5 to 30, and 30 to 100. That's the definition of the home ignition zone. And ideally, in the first 5 feet, you have nothing combustible. And that's a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, but that is what we recommend. Or at least if there's going to be things in that area, that they're native fire resistant plants, of which we can supply a lot of lists for how to accomplish that, and that it's lean, clean, and green. That's our idea with that, because it's been shown time and time again that that 0 to 5 feet, if you can keep a fire away from that part of the house is really likely to survive. Fires, houses don't burn in fires because of the wall of fire. They burn from these embers that can fly miles in front of the fire depending on the wind. And if they land on receptive fuels on the house, really close to the house, they can bring the fire to the house. At some point, it's not a forest fire, it's a home-to-home conflagration. It becomes home fires. That's what happened in California. Yes, embers flew down into those neighborhoods, and one home caught the next home, caught the next home. If you look closely at a lot of those pictures, the trees are still green. It's the homes that burned and the trees are still green. So focusing on the home ignition zone is a critical portion of our grant program. And basically it covers a big portion of the west side of the Bridgers and most of the Gallatin front there in different zones. And that's there's 13 different project areas, and they are identified by fuels and their proximity to the wildland urban intermix, which means closer to the forest property. So the other grant we have is a federal grant through the Forest Service called the Community Wildfire Defense Grant. And that we can treat large acreages with that. Again, that's along the North Gallatin front, from basically the mouth of Gallatin Canyon all the way to the Park County, Gallatin County line on the east. So rather large area. We've probably completed about 150 acres of treatment in that by the end of the year. And that again is for private landowners, and it's a cost share program. I should go back to the FEMA grant real quickly. That's also a cost share program, but we have a fuels crew that can actually work on people's homes for free. They just have to pay for the removal of the debris. So it reduces the cost barrier for homeowners because that work can be quite expensive. The cost share program for the other 2 grants we have is basically the same, and we can reimburse landowners up to $2,000 per acre of treatment. So we go map an area, very similar to what Ariana's mapping. We're looking for shaded fuel breaks. We're trying to, our goal at the end after a project is that we want it to look like what a good fire would do when it came through, clean up all the underbrush, reduce the ladder fuels, and we want it to look like a fire went through but not be black. So we're leaving the good fuels, leaving the good vegetation, considering erosion and that sort of thing. Because we've suppressed fire for so long, we're in a situation where we have too much fuel. And now that we have lots of people living in proximity to that fuel, that's why we have the um, homes burning that are in the wildland urban interface. So that's kind of it for the programs we have. We are not trying to exclude fire. We want to reduce the intensity of fire so it can do its good work for us and not be stand replacing fires, which ultimately have a huge effect on the watershed via erosion and runoff, as both John and Ariana have spoken about. So that's our program. We work with private landowners, and we try to focus as much as we can on landowners, especially on the larger projects, for cross-boundary work. So if NRCS has a project going on, we would like to work with the neighbors next to them. Or if we know that the Forest Service has got a project going on in that Cottonwood area, we've done a lot of work in the Cottonwood area this year. So the more people the more fuels reduction treatments we can tie together, the better off we all are.
Great. Thank you so
Yep.
much, Jay.
No
That
problem.
was a great, really quick overview of a ton of work that you and your program does. Any clarifying questions before we go to our last panelist? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. Jay, you're very clear. Thank you for that.
Yep.
And again, I just want to highlight, thank you for talking about the partnerships. There's a piece of this on public land, a piece on private land. Appreciate that mix. And we're going to move to our last panelist, Brian Croft, forester from DNRC. And I see Eli and Kara are here. We're delighted to have you as a water collaborative. We tend to talk to the water division more, but it is so nice to be able to hear more about you, how your activities, how you think about these connections. Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you. And if you need to share anything, that is at the bottom.
Sure. Thank you for that introduction, and happy to be here. I'm a forester for Montana DNRC. There's two of us on the Central Lands Office. I cover north of I-90, and I have a counterpart that works south of I-90. Currently, I do have an active timber sale in the Horseshoe Hills on the Dry Creek Road. So I'm hoping to dovetail kind of on the previous discussion of getting rid of some juniper and returning some water to these upland watersheds, kind of a broad arching goal I hope to see in the mix there. And then fire resiliency on the landscape where we can help out on DNRC is certainly something we're looking at and addressing on our ground. We are mandated by the state legislature to harvest X amount of board feet per year to benefit K through 12 education. So that is why we harvest wood. It pays for my wages and goes back to public schools typically. Yeah, being firewise is something we're definitely aware of and involved with. I participate where I can on fires. I'm typically an engine boss for DNRC. Jay just gave us lunches last week. Appreciate that on one of the fires I was on. And happy to talk about our streamside management zones. That is law and that we have to abide by anytime we're operating near a stream, to whether we're removing commercial products or not along a stream channel or considering different actions. Like I say, in my case, up in the Horseshoe Hills, I'm trying to get rid of juniper to try to see if I can get some more activity in some of our upland stream reaches that are not quite dry, but on the verge of being dry, but I know there's water there. So kind of interested to see where management and these water tables can meet and see if we can get some positive results.
Great. Thank you. And Brian, if you wouldn't mind, you touched on it. Would you mind expanding on kind of the unique role and legislative mandate that the NRC has in managing its state lands? And then if you wouldn't mind just talking about that streamside management zones just a little more. I think it's a really interesting way the department does that.
Absolutely. Most of the time when I interact with the public, they have no idea what state land is. And a lot of people call it public land. That's not actually the case. It's state trust land, and it's managed in the benefit of our certain different trusts. The largest one, like I said, is K through 12, the School of the Blind. So anytime we do any action on state land and then revenue is generated, it then goes back to the associated trust that gets a payout to that particular trust entity once a year. So that's kind of interesting. And so the legislature determines what we shall cut on each land office. Like I said, I'm in the Central Lands Office. Geographically, the Central Land Office covers the Continental Divide would be our western boundary, and then the eastern boundary would be, say, like Meagher County, Park County, Beaverhead County, all the way down to the Idaho border. And there's two of us that are responsible for all trees on state land in that area. Working with private landowners is key. 60% of our ground on the Central Lands Office is not legally accessible. So we are in the business of networking and making partnerships with our private landowners, lessees, ranchers, and coexisting in their world, because a lot of times they do control access to a lot of our different properties. We do have a lot of land, not a lot, but a number of parcels in Gallatin County that are legally accessible, that the public can visit and that we've managed in the past. And so, yeah, SMZ law, that is, I'm not going to try and quote it exactly, but if you reference it, there's a lot of good literature out there to determine the type of stream that you're working along, adjacent to, determine the appropriate type of classification. And then you can read in the stream law exactly how we go about treating that. Sometimes we'll treat woody material with inside the SMZ, sometimes we won't. It's kind of on a case-by-case basis of the ground we're working in. In the Central Lands Office, a lot of times we're in drier site conditions. Doug first, the prevalent species on state land that we manage. There's obviously other species presence, but that's the main one. And Gallatin County seems to be about the wettest county on the Central Lands Office, so it presents some unique opportunities with the little bit more vigorous watersheds than you would get around Helena or Dillon area in particular. So, any other questions, Karen, on that front you'd like me to elaborate on?
I'm sure there will be, but let me just check if there's any other clarifying questions for Brian. Okay, not seeing any right now, but thank you, Brian, because I think DNRC plays a really unique role in how your forestry management works in the state.
Yeah, absolutely. We're very active, and I like to think of DNRC ground kind of like a working ranch, since that's kind of how we treat the ground. Each piece of state land is typically leased out by a neighboring ranch that runs cows on the ground, so there's a certain amount of impact there. We occasionally treat commercial timber when it's available or it's at the right age. And a big part of working in these drier landscapes, kind of going back to what Jay said, we're trying to dial them back to more historic conditions. So the vegetation has expanded well beyond its historical footprint. For example, I mentioned I'm up in the Horseshoe Hills on the Dry Creek Road right now on a section of state land. My timber sale area is only 96 acres, but since the midpoint of last century, that particular parcel has seen 106 acres of conifer expansion. So we have a pretty detailed GIS shop within DNRC, and they're able to spatially look at each section of state land. And we use the Montana Library. It's a Landscape Viewers, the name of the tool. And they use a lot of that historic imagery, and they're able to calculate almost on a tree basis what each tree on the landscape quantifies. And so in particular, that one I wanted to mention on Dry Creek, that one section alone has experienced 150 acres of conifer expansion since the midpoint of last year. So about 70 years, we've lost, over 100 acres to conifer expansion. And there's different impacts to wildlife too. It's my understanding, working with the FWP on that sale, and just getting familiar with how juniper can be impactful to mule deer as well. I wouldn't necessarily have thought that, but it's occupying such a dramatic part of the landscape at this point that it is impacting wildlife as well. Not only just the water, but there's a number of different facets where they're all kind of tied in here in their own ways.
Great, thank you. Any other clarifying questions? I'm not seeing any at this point. I want to quick touch on a couple of our additional members had some activities that they brought up, and I just want to have them bring this up briefly as we get into more of the deeper questions and the discussion phase. Abby, you brought up, it sounds like Upper Gallatin is getting into some more forest health, and you also were going to talk a little bit about alpinscapes, I think.
As Karen said, my name is Abby. I'm with the nonprofit Grow Wild. So we're mainly serving Upper Gallatin watershed, Big Sky area. It's kind of like touching on both Madison and Gallatin counties. Kind of, yeah, our first thing that we're working on forestry wise is looking to hire a forester position in our organization to like kind of expand from, we have a 2-person team right now, hopefully a third is a forester. And kind of some background organization, a big part of what we do is landowner assistance. So we'll go do landowner site visits, and a majority of that is focused on noxious weed management, as well as promoting native plants, and kind of, yeah, helping people kind of figure out management plans for their own private land. And something that we've noticed throughout all the years of doing that is how many forestry questions we get. And then along with, I think, maybe a more recent like uptick in people really caring about that home ignition zone and being really thoughtful about, you know, what they have around their homes and their health of their forests. And just, yeah, like wildfire, urban interface, all of that. Yeah, we've noticed like a bigger need for people to have that resource in Big Sky, because it's so far away from both Madison and Gallatin counties and the weed districts and all of that there. So it can be hard for people to get out there and serve that community. And so we're working in collaboration as well with the Big Sky Fire Department because they also have very limited capacity to serve all of those landowners out there. And so, yeah, so we're looking to, it was so very early stages, we're applying for grants. But we're hoping to like ideally have a forester start either like January through March of next year and then allow them to, yeah, just be a really good asset for the Big Sky community because there's a lot of trees up there and there's a lot of need for them to take care of that. And then Alpenscapes is another collaboration between Grow Wild, Gallatin River Task Force, Big Sky Fire Department, and then Big Sky Sustainability Network Organization. And so that's kind of like a big collaborative effort to touch on both, you know, water health, watershed health, water quality, fire. Risk mitigation, promoting, you know, native plants, management of noxious weeds, and then overall kind of sustainability for people's homes. And so again, along with that is a really big portion of that is managing for fire and promoting fire resistant plants and yeah, just like techniques that landowners can use around their homes as they're building or as they're you know, choosing what to plant, all of that, or renovating things of just promoting good practices as a landowner. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of it.
Great. Thank you, Abby, for bringing that into the conversation. And it was really interesting as we were developing this because we had not known you were going to hire another forest health person. So we'll look forward to that. And then the other one I heard from before, and I'm not sure we can say much about it, but Extension has a forester for the state. And Adam or Elizabeth, Tim wasn't able to come today, but do either of you have anything to say about, you know, Extension's role in helping with forest health and helping forest health and best fire management practices? I don't know if either of you can say anything about that, but I just wanted to again mention that Extension has this. Either you want to come on?
Hi, I might interject. I'm Eli Davis. I'm the service forester for the Bozeman unit. So I mostly work with private landowners on private lands, and I essentially act as a consultant. So if you have landowners that have questions pertaining to wildfire, forest health, prescription, forest health practices specifically related to stream health, I'm also the person who administers and regulates stream management zone law and HRA law in Bozeman unit. So if you have questions for those folks or they have questions for me, feel free to send them along. Yeah, I can share my contact info later.
That'd be great. Thank you. And Eli, thanks so much for reminding us of that part of the NRC's work and the work you do. And then
Adam,
Elizabeth, I saw you coming on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is Adam on here or otherwise I can jump in?
You're both on here.
Go for it,
Okay.
Elizabeth.
I don't have a ton to share. Lexi Brown tends to be the person who does a lot of the work, our forest stewardship coordinator. About once a year, they actually do some programming out here in the Gallatin area where they work with local landowners on doing some of that wildfire mitigation issues and forest health management. Those do fill up really quickly. She tends to advertise them in other ways. I usually do share them out when I can, but those fill up really quickly. So if we have folks living in those, I know they do a lot of work up in the Bridgers, and Adam, you can jump in with any of that if you want. But anyway, they do a lot. They typically work out here once a year doing some of these programs. But I did also want to share for those who are interested, they're going to be doing a Project Learning Tree facilitator training north of Missoula in September in Greeno, Montana. So if folks are interested in that, just shoot me a message and I'll share that information directly with you to sign up. So this would actually be doing the training to become a facilitator for Project Learning Tree. So it's kind of a good education program for some of our folks who do work in that space. I don't know if you have anything else to add, feel free, Adam.
No, that's great to highlight the MSU Extension forestry resources that come to the Gallatin. I mean, as I think was said, that portion of MSU Extension is based out of University of Montana, whereas the rest of the state specialists are here in Bozeman, like myself as the water quality specialist. And the forest stewardship program has resources to help landowners write their own forest plan. And so many of those resources are available on the Extension Forest Stewardship Program website. And so supporting landowners in managing their forest on their land is a lot of work that they do.
Great. Thank you, Adam. Appreciate the connections. We just knew it was a hard time of year for extension in general to get here today. Thank you, Elizabeth, too, for those resources. Okay, I'm going to open up the floor to questions.